Right now, somewhere quietly in Japan, a stranger stands still while a government worker carefully measures her waist. After all, this is not a private clinic, a wellness retreat, or some optional fitness trend reserved only for the curious, truly. It is federal law, applied every single year to tens of millions of ordinary adults across the entire nation, really. A nurse wraps a simple tape measure firmly around the waist, and one specific number quietly decides what happens next. For women specifically, that number is 90 centimeters, and crossing it triggers something most countries never even bother offering, honestly. Not shame, not punishment, but structured counseling, designed carefully to quietly bring that number gently back down again, slowly, clearly. Think for a moment about how genuinely strange it truly is that a government carefully measures a citizen's waistline yearly. Most nations quietly track hospital beds and vaccine numbers, yet Japan instead carefully tracks the exact shape of aging bodies. That single choice alone tells you almost everything about how seriously an entire culture takes the middle of the body. And once counseling actually begins, it rarely ever involves medication because the real prescription is almost always a daily habit. Compare that approach to how most Western healthcare systems wait patiently until disease finally appears before offering any real help. Japan instead builds prevention directly into ordinary daily life, long before a single symptom ever gets the chance to appear. That difference alone might explain more about the 40% gap than any single food or nutrient ever truly could. None of these particular habits require expensive supplements, paid subscriptions, or anything aggressively sold inside a glossy fitness magazine advertisement. They require nothing more than a plate, a comfortable pair of shoes, and one small shift in the daily sequence. And that is precisely why this quiet story matters far more than almost anything else circulating online about belly fat. Now, compare all of that to what is currently happening across the ocean inside the United States right now entirely. There, obesity affects roughly 4 out of every 10 adults, an almost unbelievable number once you sit with it eventually. In Japan, that same statistic collapses down to somewhere around 4% of the entire national population instead today. Genuinely. That is not a small gap. That is essentially a tenfold difference between two modern, wealthy, developed nations today, certainly. So the real question isn't whether this striking difference exists, because the numbers already make that painfully obvious enough, obviously. The real question is what these women are actually doing differently, quietly, every single day of their ordinary lives instead. And once you fully understand what it actually is, you will realize willpower was never really the true answer, finally. It was always about a body quietly responding to invisible signals most of us simply walk past completely unaware, actually. Before going any further, you need to understand exactly what that tape measure is really protecting you against here, simply. It has almost nothing to do with the numbers staring back at you from a simple bathroom scale each morning. The real danger lives much deeper, wrapped tightly around internal organs, where absolutely no finger could ever reach it gradually. Doctors call this visceral fat, and it behaves nothing like the ordinary fat sitting just beneath your skin's surface naturally. It quietly interferes with your organs, disrupts your hormones, and steadily raises your long-term risk of serious chronic disease, gently. And here is something that will genuinely surprise you if you assumed this entire story was simply about thinness already. Japan actually struggles with the opposite extreme among many of its younger women who trend dangerously underweight instead entirely, truly. So, this was never truly a culture chasing skinny bodies or obsessing over restrictive, punishing dieting mentalities at all, really. This is instead a culture quietly protecting one very specific place, the deep hidden space behind a woman's waistline, honestly. Which brings us directly to a question you have probably already started silently asking yourself right about now, honestly. Clearly. Why does this danger suddenly appear right around a woman's 40th birthday, almost like someone flipping a hidden switch entirely? For most of a woman's adult life, the hormone estrogen quietly decides exactly where fat gets stored inside her eventually. It typically sends that fat toward the hips and thighs, shaping the body in a familiar, predictable, lifelong way, genuinely. But as menopause slowly approaches, often years before periods actually stop, estrogen begins falling steadily and quietly declining instead, certainly. And once those hormone levels fall, the old instructions inside the body change completely without ever offering any warning, obviously. Fat that once settled comfortably on the hips now migrates deep into the abdomen almost immediately without asking permission quietly. Before this hormonal shift occurs, visceral fat makes up roughly 5 to 8% of total body fat only instead. After the shift fully takes hold, that same number can climb sharply toward 15 or even 20% total, finally. Nothing about her personal discipline changed, yet suddenly her entire body looks and feels completely unfamiliar to her now, actually. This is precisely why so many women feel quietly betrayed by their own changing bodies once they turn 40, simply. You did not fail at anything, and you certainly did not suddenly lose your self-control overnight either time, gradually. Your biology simply rewired itself, following rules written millions of years before modern dieting culture ever even existed here, naturally. Now, you might reasonably wonder if Japanese women are simply protected by naturally superior genetics alone, and nothing else, steadily. The evidence clearly says no, and honestly, the proof behind that answer is genuinely fascinating once you examine it gently. As Western fast food and sugary drinks slowly spread through Japan, national waistlines began quietly expanding there too, eventually. Already. That increase happened fastest exactly where traditional Japanese eating habits faded away the quickest, across the entire country's regions, truly. And when Japanese families move abroad and gradually adopt Western eating patterns, something quietly revealing happens next each time, really. Their natural protection against belly fat slowly disappears, almost as if it was never truly permanent in the first place. Which clearly means whatever is protecting Japanese women is not something simply written into their DNA before birth, once more. It is instead written deeply into their daily habits, repeated quietly, almost invisibly, thousands of times every single year, clearly. And that single fact means every one of these protective habits can absolutely be studied, learned, and quietly borrowed, entirely. Let's walk carefully through exactly what these habits are, starting with the one nobody ever really seems to notice, eventually. The first hidden habit is movement, though calling it structured exercise would completely miss the entire point of it, genuinely. One massive international study tracking phone data found that Japanese adults average around 6,000 steps every day. Once more. Americans, by direct comparison within that very same global study, average noticeably fewer than 5,000 steps each day, obviously. That gap is not coming from gym memberships or dedicated workout routines squeezed into already busy morning work schedules, quietly. It is coming instead from walking to train stations, walking home again, and simply walking to buy groceries daily, finally. Japanese cities are physically built entirely around walking, so meaningful movement happens without anyone ever consciously deciding to exercise completely. And that constant, invisible daily movement becomes especially powerful once hormones begin shifting sharply after reaching the age of 40, actually. The second hidden habit lives quietly inside the glass, sitting beside nearly every single traditional Japanese meal ever served, simply. In Japan, the default everyday drink is unsweetened green tea, or simply plain water, almost nothing sweeter than that gradually. Sugary beverages simply are not deeply woven into daily life there, the way they dominate life almost everywhere else, naturally. This sounds minor until you realize liquid sugar is actually one of the fastest direct routes to visceral fat steadily. Those calories hit your bloodstream almost instantly, spiking blood sugar without ever truly leaving you feeling genuinely satisfied afterward, gently. A culture that quietly avoids drinking its sugar has effectively closed one of the widest open doors to belly fat. Now, here is the habit almost nobody ever discusses openly, and it genuinely fascinated the researchers studying it closely already. A typical Japanese plate is unusually rich in two very specific things, eaten together at nearly every single meal, truly. Fiber, coming from vegetables, seaweed, and soy, paired constantly alongside fermented foods like miso, natto, and simple pickles right there. Both of these ingredients feed the trillions of bacteria quietly living inside your entire digestive system every single day, honestly. When those bacteria are properly fed, they produce compounds linked closely to better metabolism and noticeably lower inflammation levels, clearly. Early research even connects these specific compounds to reduced visceral fat, although much of this evidence remains still developing entirely. Some of the strongest results discovered so far still come from animal studies rather than direct human clinical trials eventually. Still, this consistently points towards something real quietly happening beneath the surface of a traditional Japanese dinner plate itself, genuinely. The Japanese diet may genuinely be reshaping the belly from the inside out, not simply through counting calories obsessively, certainly. Which brings us directly to the single habit I would hand you above absolutely every other one already mentioned, obviously. It is remarkably simple, it is backed by some of the clearest evidence available anywhere, and you could start tonight. In Japan, meals traditionally begin with vegetables first, followed closely by soup, with rice always arriving last, deliberately, patiently, quietly. That specific eating order quietly changes what happens to the exact same food once it actually enters your body instead. Researchers tested this exact idea directly, and honestly, the results were extremely hard for anyone to argue with afterward, finally. When people ate their vegetables before their carbohydrates, their blood sugar rose far more gently after eating that meal, completely. This was not just true for a single, isolated meal tested once in some controlled laboratory setting either time, actually. Over a full 2 years, patients simply taught to eat vegetables first saw meaningful, long-term blood sugar improvements overall, gradually. A comparison group eating those exact same foods in reverse order barely improved at all during that entire time, naturally. Pause on that specific fact for a moment, because the real implication is honestly far more powerful than it sounds. Same meal, same total calories, just a slightly different sequence, and somehow the body ends up storing noticeably less fat. Every single time that after-meal blood sugar spike gets softened, your body spends less time trapped in fat storage steadily. And the quiet beauty here is that absolutely nothing you genuinely love ever gets removed from your dinner plate, gently. The rice stays exactly where it always was, only the specific order in which you eat it slowly changes already. There is also the old Japanese habit of eating until roughly 80% full, then simply stopping right there, truly. Not stuffed, not starving, just comfortably satisfied, which fits perfectly into the same gentle, forgiving overall daily eating pattern, really. But notice something genuinely important about every single habit we have carefully walked through together just a moment ago, honestly. None of these are diets, and none of them ever require you to walk around feeling truly, painfully hungry, clearly. So step back for a moment and really absorb the complete picture that has slowly formed here together right now. The belly fat that often appears after 40 is entirely real, driven by real hormonal forces quietly shifting underneath eventually. Falling estrogen, deep fat migrating inward, none of that was something you simply imagined or wrongly exaggerated in yourself genuinely. What protects Japanese women has almost nothing to do with possessing more raw willpower than anyone else has ever, certainly. It comes instead from an entire day quietly arranged so that healthier choices happen almost completely without any effort, obviously. They move constantly without ever calling it structured exercise or scheduling some dedicated, separate workout session on purpose either. Quietly. They simply do not drink their sugar, choosing tea or plain water instead, without ever thinking twice about it finally. They feed their gut bacteria daily without ever needing to understand the exact underlying biological science behind any of it. And they eat their food in an order that keeps the body's internal fat storage switch turned down low completely. The willpower you have spent years quietly blaming yourself for was honestly never the real missing piece here at all. Your environment was the true missing piece all along, quietly shaping outcomes long before any conscious choice ever entered, actually. And once you finally see that clearly, everything about this entire story starts making complete, obvious sense right now, simply. Think about how different this feels from every diet culture message you have ever been fed before this moment, gradually. Nobody here is telling you to skip meals, count every calorie, or punish yourself for simply feeling hungry sometimes, naturally. Instead, an entire nation quietly arranged its daily rhythms so protection happened automatically, without anyone ever noticing the efforts steadily. That is the real secret hiding beneath the tape measure, the counseling, and every single statistic already mentioned earlier gently. So if you wanted to borrow even a small piece of this quiet protection starting tonight, here's exactly how. Eat your vegetables first and deliberately let the carbohydrates arrive later, closer to the very end of your meal already. Replace just one single sugary drink today with either plain water or a simple cup of unsweetened tea instead, truly. Add something fermented and something genuinely rich in fiber into at least one single meal you eat today, right there. And take that short walk you would normally talk yourself out of taking on any ordinary, busy, tiring day, honestly. None of this requires a strict diet, an expensive program, or a dramatic overnight transformation of your entire lifestyle now. It simply requires a small set of quiet defaults that make the better choice feel effortless and remarkably easy, clearly. And once those defaults are firmly in place, your body quietly starts doing the rest of the work alone entirely. This is not a temporary trend borrowed briefly from another culture for a few fleeting weeks of pure motivation eventually. It is a way of living that has protected generations of women long before any of this ever went viral. And now that you understand exactly why it works, the only real question left is whether you will start genuinely. Not someday, not next month, not after some perfect Monday morning you keep endlessly promising quietly to yourself. Instead, certainly, tonight, at your very next meal. The vegetables simply come first, and everything else quietly begins falling into place. Obviously.